Welcome to the Mullin It Over podcast with Reverend Jack Mullins and Austin Covey.
I've got a question for you. In working with small congregations, and by small, I'm going to define that as below 100.
Okay.
These congregations, in my observation and experience, tend to be struggling numerically and financially.
By numerically, you mean membership-wise?
Membership-wise. Tend to see, I think, a lot of them still in buildings that accommodated congregations of 300 or more.
Mm-hmm.
So the overhead is killing them. And they want to maintain some level of programming.
Mm-hmm.
A question that they often have is, as they transition from a viable congregation to something perhaps a little bit less than viable, how do they maintain effective ministry on a very tight shoestring budget? How can you, how can you provide minimal contact through multimedia effectively?
So those are two very different questions.
Okay.
How do you
pick one?
How do you function on a shoestring budget, and how do you provide minimal contact through social media? Are very different.
Take the first one.
I would start by saying their budget is impacted by two things, right? And I'm going to use terms that are more business related than nonprofit related just for clarity. And I understand that nonprofit terminology, particularly church terminology, is sometimes different. And sometimes church people, I've had pastors in the past kind of bristle when I use more business oriented terms. But I think they're more universally understood. And so I think when you're speaking in a context like this, for people to understand it, using those terms make it more universally understandable, if that makes sense. So budget is really two things, right? There's income and there's expenditure. I do think, like you said, it's very common for a lot of churches in our denomination, similar denominations, to be in that position of we were big once. And we had a large facility when we were big once, and now we have shrunk, but we're still in the big building. And personally, I'm a fan of keeping the big building if you can afford it, because paid for property is better than unpaid for property, and a big building is in a lot of ways more beneficial than a smaller building. I'm not going to say it's universally better, but it can have its advantages. And acquiring another big building is hard and very expensive. So I think you do have to get a little bit creative with your income aspect. You need to be careful in not doing something that's going to cost you your tax-free status. Mm-hmm. So for any of you out there, if you have ideas are good. I would run those by either a CPA or a tax attorney to make sure you're not putting yourself in jeopardy. But becoming a little bit more creative in hosting events, be like concerts or different things like that. You can take up love offerings, hosting community organizations that will pay you a love offering, et cetera, et cetera. Get, your biggest asset is your building, and I do think the days of churches only being occupied one day a week effectively outside of office staff are kind of over. It doesn't make sense to try to float a building on donations when you're occupying it one day a week. So try to keep it as busy as you can. From an expense standpoint, trim the fat. A lot of churches have a lot of fat, and maybe that's not a proper term for people these days. People get sensitive about their weight or whatever. I don't mean it in that capacity, obviously. But it can be very easy to be overspending on things, whether it be, internet bills always go up. So sometimes maybe look at another provider see if you change providers, if you can get your bill suppressed. I don't know if this is the kind of stuff you were asking about.
Sure.
But,
And I think you're exactly right. How do you trim those expenses? Stay on top of them and continue to seek out a better deal.
Yes.
On everything you can.
Yes.
Take advantage of that tax-free status.
Well, and understand that a lot of companies, Microsoft, for example, Google, offer services that would normally be paid for services. They offer them for free for nonprofits. So you can get Microsoft Office, the whole Office suite, for free as a nonprofit if you register through Microsoft. You can get Google Workspace, Google Drive, Google Docs, all that kind of thing for free through Google as a nonprofit. So you might be paying for software. I mean, we were when we got here. We were paying for licenses for software that we didn't have to pay licenses for, or that we could get cheaper licenses for. Check TechSoup. We don't have anything through them currently because it was actually a better deal to go through Microsoft directly than it was to go through TechSoup. And then Sales Shop. You know, when you and I were together at our previous church, and we did the live streaming setup at the beginning of COVID. We built the entire live streaming setup, a new soundboard, computer, cameras, tripods, cabling, the whole shebang for less than $5,000. I think quite a bit less than $5,000. I understand we were fortunate that we had the ability to build the computers and everything ourselves. We didn't buy an off-the-shelf computer. We built a computer. I understand not everybody has the capacity to do that, but it is pretty common for places to put stuff on sale, particularly Black Friday, holiday season kind of stuff. And a lot of times, people go to Best Buy or Newegg or Amazon or whatever. You can have a lot of success checking manufacturer websites, so HP, Dell, Lenovo, whoever. And sometimes they will have better deals directly on their website than you can get through a third-party retailer.
You make a good point. I think churches forget. We are a nonprofit organization.
Mm-hmm.
We don't think of ourselves in that way. We tend to think of ourselves as the church.
Right.
So we ignore the solutions out there for nonprofits. But that's what we are, and we need to, I think, learn how to fund certain aspects of our ministries via grants and grant writing. I've been involved at churches who have champagne tastes on a beer budget, but they've never outgrown it.
Yes.
And so they are used to doing everything in the best way possible because they are trying to maintain appearances. Appearances don't mean a thing if you have to lock that door for the last time.
Well, and that's something, the saying that I use a lot when I'm talking to people is you don't need a Lamborghini to go to the grocery store.
Yeah.
Understand what you're trying to accomplish and what you actually need to accomplish that. And like Jack said, grant writing, there are a lot of resources online now that maybe 10 or 20 years ago weren't there. Now there are a lot of things like ChatGPT, which can actually help you generate the grant writing proposal for you, right? Mm-hmm. Like leveraging some of the technology that's available now that even 5 years ago wasn't available.
Yeah.
And having some level of competency in doing, we talked earlier about doing your due diligence. Nobody has to be an expert in everything, but do some due diligence. Like I know of a church that bought a local network server, like a storage server, and they spent like $14,000 or $16,000 on the server. And I pulled it up it was a Dell rack mount unit, and the brand new unit from Dell's like $2,200. So I don't know, and it's like I don't know what all they had included in that.
Where'd the other $10,000 go?
Basically, it's like the other $10,000, $12,000, $14,000 just kind of like, you know what I mean? Like, where'd that go? And really, was that necessary for what they were doing?
Yeah.
You can buy, if you do need networking equipment, you can buy refurbished networking equipment. There are entire companies, and all they do is buy networking equipment from major companies, refurbish it, and then resell it.
Yeah.
And it's good stuff. I have a refurbished server that I bought 10 years ago, and it was used when I bought it, and it still runs. I crank it up every day, and it still runs.
Yeah.
So don't overbuy. It's very easy to do that. There are certain companies that have a reputation for doing this. They sort of tier their things in such a way where it's like, for only $50 more, you get this next thing with more bells and whistles, and then for only $50 more, you get this next thing. And so when you started out, you were going to spend like $600. Next thing you know, you're spending $2,000.
Yeah.
Because you just like.
It's not exactly bait and switch, but it's pretty close.
Right. They just make it. They make the tiers just close enough that you go, oh, well, I only, if they were $200, you'd go, it's not worth it, right?
Yeah.
But it's just close enough that you go, for only $50 more, I can get this next thing.
Yeah. But it won't work right unless you buy this other component for another 50.
That's not. Yeah, that happens too. This is a little different. I'm not going to call it. There is a specific company that is famous for doing this. I won't call them out, but it's like tablet such and such, this amount of money.
Yeah.
Double the storage, this extra amount of money. This other newer, better thing, slightly more money.
Yeah.
This other better thing with slightly more storage. And next thing you know,
yeah,
you're 2.5 times as much as you originally intended to spend because you kind of nickel and dime yourself up.
Yeah.
But that is true too. People, I've seen people sell dedicated streaming boxes, and it's an Intel Nook, that you can buy off the shelf, and they're selling it for 4 times the price because it's a dedicated streaming box. It's not. It's just a mini PC. There's nothing remarkable about it.
Yeah. I've been involved. One of the largest, used to be the largest DOC, Disciples of Christ congregation in the nation, and they were still living under the mentality, we're not going to get our hands dirty.
Mm-hmm.
And what had happened, the facility had grown beyond their capability to get their hands dirty. So now they had to hire everything done. And then I served a congregation, and they did everything themselves with the exception perhaps of HVAC, heating, air conditioning. And they could do anything. And they took advantage of their internal resources and talent pool. And I think that's one way you keep your church operating at peak efficiency on that shoestring budget. Austin and I built a sound booth, and the building in which we are located has had some creative contracting in the past, and squareness is not necessarily a concept that was often used in terms of walls and angles, with the exception of the sound booth we put up. Neither of us are professional carpenters, but we were methodical. We took care of making sure we did it as right as possible. We did it ourselves and saved probably $2,000, $2,500 in labor costs. Material would have been more because the contractor would have bought the materials and added 25% to the expense of the materials.
There would have been some kind of markup. I'll take your word on what the markup would have been, but
and that's one way churches can operate on those shoestring budgets is do as much as you efficiently and effectively can. Now, there are some things it's just not practical.
Don't do electrical. Unless you have a certified electrician, don't do electrical.
Yeah, and probably stay away from the plumbing.
Yes.
I mean, you can get away with it sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, with the electrical, one, it's a fire hazard. Two, your insurance may not cover it because you're not a licensed electrician. So if you have a licensed electrician at the church, it's great. If you don't,
hire one.
Not worth it. Yeah, hire one.
Because you can kill somebody messing with electrical that you don't know what you're doing.
That, or even if you know what you're doing, if you burn the church down and it wasn't done by a licensed electrician, you're not going to have any insurance coverage. There's too many headaches with that. Don't do that.
Yeah.
just don't.
Don't fall into the trap of false economy.
Yeah.
And
one of the things that I would reference too is, like, again, when we're talking about understand your needs. A lot of churches still carry huge copy machines, and almost nobody owns those. They're almost always a lease. Most churches don't need a copy machine that can print 100,000 pages a month or whatever, some mega $30,000 copy machine. And that's, if you look at how much they cost, that's how much they cost if you buy them outright. I know churches who are paying $600, $700, $800 a month for a copy machine lease, and they print 100 bulletins a week. And it doesn't, you can buy an off-the-shelf copy machine that uses toner, not an ink one, but an actual like toner copy machine for $600 or $700, which is a lot of money up front, but these other folks are paying that every month. So yeah, I mean the $600 or $700 one prints 20 pages a minute instead of 40 pages a minute or whatever. I don't know copy machine specs off the top of my head, but
Yeah.
But if you're only printing 100 bulletins, do you need to pay $10,000 a year for a copy machine? Probably not.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff adds up over time and can eat your lunch. And those contracts are really hard to get out of.
And another money pit are church vans.
Mm-hmm.
And lots of churches have gotten out of the van ownership
Mm-hmm.
because the insurance is prohibitive. The cost of the van, unless you can buy it outright, you're paying monthly payments. And it's really cheaper if you're going to carry 10 kids somewhere over the weekend. Go to Enterprise, rent a
Right.
van for the weekend. You do that 4 times a year is a lot cheaper
Mm-hmm.
than paying for 1 year round.
And that's something, like when you say if you do it 4 times a year, before you do anything, cost it out. The way that I tend to cost things, equipment or whatever we buy, is over the warranty of the item. Because if it breaks during the warranty, you can usually get it fixed or replaced. If it breaks outside of the warranty, you're going to have to buy it again. So just assume you're going to have to buy a new one every time the warranty runs out, and kind of figure out your costing. How much is this going to cost us, or how much is this going to save us over that time period, and then does it make sense?
Yeah. You mentioned a $600 copier.
Mm-hmm.
What's the warranty on those? Normally 3 years?
I don't want to say normally. Ours is 3 years.
3 years.
It could be 1 year, 3 year, 5 year. Just, you would have to check that, but ours is 3 years.
So you figured $600 over 3 years. That's $200 a year.
Right.
That's pretty darn cheap. I mean, you can't lease one.
No, you're going to
For
spend minimally that much a month
Yeah.
on a lease. So,
I think part of the difficulty in churches operating efficiently is being honest with themselves about their situation.
mm-hmm.
Because that's painful, that hurts. Churches especially, I think, we tend to live in the past.
Well, and I think this is true. I've seen this in small businesses, even in big businesses and churches, whatever, that I've worked with. Like our copy machine doesn't fold the bulletins. We have to fold them manually. And, it's very easy to say, well, we need this better one because it folds them for us. Okay, again, you fold 100 of them a week. You're going to pay, instead of $700 one time, you're going to pay $700 a month for 5 years.
And for 100 bulletins.
For 100 bulletins that it folds a week. How long does it take you, or, do you have a volunteer? If your paid staff's folding them, how long does it take to fold them? How much are they paid per hour? Okay, how much does it cost you to fold those bulletins versus how much does it cost you to buy the machine that folds the bulletins?
And you touched on, I think, a very salient point is volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people are more than willing to come in and perform an act of service
Mm-hmm.
for the church. Old or young, folding a bulletin is not rocket science.
No.
And if it's someone that has trouble lining it up, you can get a paper cutter and show them how to run it up against the guide, and that will help them.
You can actually get a paper folder. You can get a manual folder where you put them in and it folds them. You just pull the lever.
Not if you've ever had one before.
Oh, I haven't. They're not that good?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'd rather train a volunteer.
Yeah, that's fair. But, you know, a lot of people try to gear themselves up or accommodate for, we'll use the term peak traffic,
Yeah.
right? So we want to be able to print these bulletins on Sunday morning, and we want to be able to print 200 of them like that. Okay, well, if you start printing on Thursday, you don't need them to be able to print like,
Yeah.
you know, super fast. So, you know, plan to the average, not to the peak, I guess, if that makes sense. If you buy everything so that it functions, everything runs right at peak time, when peak time is for 2 hours on a Sunday morning, you've overspent on a lot of your stuff that doesn't get used the other 6 days a week.
Well, and part of that is if you push everything till the last minute, the odds of the whole system getting jammed up at that last minute increase, in my opinion.
Well, and that's what I'm saying is if you buy everything so that you have a greater chance of not having a bottleneck there. So you have built your entire setup around not bottlenecking in the one time you may leverage it to its peak capacity.
Yeah.
When the rest of the time you're not leveraging it at all.
Yeah. And the difficulty in that is for people like myself, plan ahead.
So, you know, if you know, say, we'll just use an arbitrary percentage scale. Say 100% would be maximum capacity, and you're like, maximum capacity of your current setup is exceeded on Sunday mornings. Like, man, we operate at 105% on Sunday mornings. For the rest of the time, you operate at 5%.
Yeah.
We'll just spread it out. Don't buy equipment to account for that that top 5% 1 day a week, when you could, like you said, plan ahead. And
for one thing, it's harder on the equipment. If you are gentle with your equipment, it will last longer. And anything you can stretch out its effective lifespan, the better investment it becomes.
Right, your ROI.
You know, now,
better.
Granted, here in our situation, we have an AV set up that lots of, I think, much larger congregations would envy. But we're able to do that because we take advantage of, I think, every bit of internal expertise, knowledge, and skill that we can. We're not having to farm out
Right.
anything.
When that goes back, like you said, be honest with yourself. It's very easy to watch something online and go, we should have that type of stream. And if who you're watching is some big mega church, understand they're operating at a capacity that you can't, right? And I don't mean that negatively towards smaller churches, just it's very easy to watch broadcast television or a big church live stream or whatever and go, that's the standard. It's like, well, that's the standard if you have 10,000 members, you know.
Yeah.
That's not the standard if you have 100 members. It's a different,
That's right.
you're playing in a whole different ballgame.
But you can do things, you can do certain things, just do them right. For example, large church, built in the 1924. So the sound system, while it had been upgraded a couple of times, was still old and antiquated, and nothing in terms of the sound gear was where it should have been. It's not hard to put your soundboard in the correct location. You may have to rerun some wiring, and you may have to find some people that will crawl under floors or between the rafters. But if you put it in the right position, it's going to work a lot more effectively for you than if you don't. And you can have a much better, like I said, hate using non-church language, but you'll have a much better product that you can take advantage of, and leave the best impression of what you're trying to accomplish that you possibly can.
I agree.
I've worked with churches, and to get them to think in terms. For a long time, everyone used evangelism as the language for church growth. And while that is scripturally effective, socially it's not so much. Went through a period where that became associated with going around knocking on doors on Saturday mornings, disturbing a whole bunch of people that didn't want to be disturbed. And I started trying to get my congregations to just simply think in terms of marketing. And what is marketing other than communicating a message effectively about what you want people to notice? Then they began to see it in a context which made sense to them as to how to, quote unquote, sell the church.
Right. People don't like that term, but
They hate the term, and it is borderline offensive, but then again, you have to do something to communicate to people what your church is, what it has to offer, how it will enable you to lean into and to live out your experience of the gospel.
when I'm sure you have heard this, I've heard people say, well, people have told us our church is the best kept secret in town, or something to that effect, right? Which is very cliche, but I mean, it's great. Some of the things we talked about on previous episodes and things about being open and accepting and this and that and whatever, and it's great to be all those things, but if nobody knows those things, then it's not really relevant, you know?
And I've tried to communicate to people when you've been told it's best kept secret in town, that should not be a point of pride.
Yeah, no, that's not a good thing.
That's not a good thing.
But it doesn't really mean anything to stand around and be like, we do all of this stuff, but nobody knows, nobody knows that you're open and accepting and welcoming to everybody and, all of this sort of thing. Unfortunately, a lot of times the voices that can be very destructive are also the ones who have the ability to be the loudest. And so for the voices that are less destructive, maybe becoming comfortable with being a loud, non-destructive voice can be a good thing. I don't know if that makes sense, but...
Yeah, it does. I know that one thing I've always tried to do in all congregations is create some form of study, Bible study, book study, something. The congregants, the members of the congregation, generally like it. It gives you a point of reference to which you can invite people to come. It's not asking them to make a commitment to the larger church. Generally, the studies that I lead are 6 weeks or so. So you're not asking them to commit a 2-year block of time. Just come, join with us, fellowship with us. We'll go through this. And at the end, we'll turn it over and probably turn over to the class members and what have you. Take advantage of your human resources, your people. A lot of people in churches have accrued a lot of wisdom and knowledge. Allow them to share it.
And emphasize, a lot of people will hesitate on that, like the business stuff, because they think the church operates differently. They think, oh, my wisdom may not be applicable here or whatever, and that's not true. Yeah. A lot of times the church needs the influence of outside people with outside perspective.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Speaking about those studies, it's time for me to go prepare for them.
Time to go get ready for Bible study.
Yes, absolutely. Hey, I've enjoyed sitting down and sharing with you about these things. It's always a good mental gymnastics exercise for me to go through these things.
Well, if you have any other questions, I don't know that we have the answer, but we might, if we don't, we might find it for you about different ideas for kind of slimming and trimming, or creatively generating revenue, or different ways that you can accomplish things, certainly put those down in the comments or email us, and we can see if we can try to help you with that.
Absolutely. Have a good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever. God bless.